We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am super excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Andrew Bartlow. He is the founder of Series B Consulting and People Leader Accelerator. Andrew, thank you so much for being here with us today. If you could share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Oh, wow. Well, thank you. So really pleased to be with you, Christina. Thanks for hosting me. My pronouns are he, him. A little bit of background. I have roughly 25 years of experience in both the working world as well as in human resources. I entered the profession straight out of grad school. And I've been in HR leadership positions at Fortune 50 companies like General Electric and Pepsi, at very early stage startups that don't exist anymore and people have probably never heard of, and everything in between. My last in-house role, I helped take a company public as their head of human resources through a big scale up, and been involved with 4 to 6 companies, depending how you count it, as the HR leader of the entire organization. A couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I pulled my golden parachute, wrote my bucket list book, and started consulting and advising, working with venture and private equity backed companies, but really dialing in on providing support and mentorship to other HR professionals so that they can navigate their careers and this profession a little bit more gracefully than maybe I did in my early and mid years. All right, so last part of that question, what did I want to be when I grew up? I didn't know that HR existed. So I wish I could say that this is what I wanted to do. Boy, back in I guess I'm a child of the 80s. I remember the TV show LA Law, and I always thought that those TV lawyers, were so smart and so capable and successful, and it was interesting work. And I always thought I wanted to be an attorney. And I actually applied and got into law schools and chose this career path instead.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, 25 years of experience and 4 to 6 companies, writing a book, sharing best practices for folks who are entering or in the space right now. How do you think about measuring company culture, both from a qualitative and quantitative lens, knowing that it's super dynamic?
Yeah, well, hey, this is a podcast about culture, right? So, how do you measure it? That's been a challenge in a lot of ways for a lot of organizations.
Mm-hmm.
I think back to Gallup and their Q12 survey, which has been so well studied and such a massive influence on employee engagement, and really one of the earlier broad-based measures of culture that became engagement. Culture Amp and AllVoices and a number of other organizations have their own proprietary surveys. I think they're all kind of rooted in the Gallup Q12 in a lot of ways. We talk about net promoter score, employee net promoter score as well nowadays. So these are all reasonably good quantitative ways to measure culture. And I guess I'd add, in some organizations, you can measure productivity based on the objective metrics of the job. In today's knowledge worker economy, that's harder in more jobs than most. Qualitative ways, that's really interesting. Qualitatively, how do you measure your culture? You can do that through listening sessions, through small group discussions. I do that as I try to elicit a company's brand, or bring some flesh to their employment value proposition. Internal communications can be a great way to understand an organization's culture. And I just say tonality in their informal discussions. You can get a sense pretty quickly. And I do due diligence discussions for a private equity firm to get to know an organization before an investment is made. And so that's one of the things that I'm asked to do is help identify any red or yellow flags around a company culture. And so I have listening sessions. I review their social media. I look at what people are talking about with this organization.
Yeah, that active listening piece is so important, kind of conducting that listening tour, having one-on-ones, and really asking for that feedback and building that trust with your team as well. It's all about the people make up the culture. There are some myths and misconceptions when it comes to human resources or people operations, talent, people teams. Do you think it's ever too early to hire your first HR or people person, executive? Sometimes people say, you need at least X number of employees.
Well, I think the first human resources hire in many early stage and fast growth companies is a recruiter or somebody spending a big chunk of their time on talent acquisition. And I actually, that's a whole chapter in the book is how to build your HR team. And so, a rule of thumb is if you're hiring 10 or more people in a year, it's probably worth your while to have at least half of somebody's job dedicated to recruiting rather than spreading it across your little team. And then it's probably once you have managers, somebody between the founders and everybody else. And that's typically around 20, 25 it's not really a magic number. It's more of a rule of thumb around it's useful to have somebody in the organization thinking about processes, thinking about internal comms, thinking about how to help talent come on board and be successful.
Absolutely. It is someone's full-time job to do that, and really thinking about that from a strategic lens too, and really proactive instead of reactive. Besides kind of having that bandwidth to do that, are there kind of other ways you think about the difference between intentionally or unsustainably growing an organization, especially as you think about kind of from startup to IPO? People say hire, hire, hire all the time. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, hey, that's the name of the game in a lot of venture-backed organizations, right? They get capital, and that's gasoline, and gasoline drives explosive growth, and it can also lead an organization to flaming out with too high of a burn rate. So planful growth is really important. That's where an HR leader can be helpful in helping an organization to outline. It doesn't need to be complicated. I'll use the HR term of workforce planning. And that's just very simply how many people doing what, generally where, do you need and when? And it doesn't have to be precisely perfect, but at least directionally correct so that when are you hiring the head of a marketing team? Is that before or after you hire the team itself? When do you start to move to a specialist environment versus a generalist environment? And that way it helps an organization avoid shooting way past its goal, running into trouble where they overhire and have to lay off. And that's a really scary, shocking time for people. And unfortunately, it happens too often. So planful growth is really important to ensure that it's sustainable.
Yeah, planful growth for the future, looking at goals and the intention behind why we're hiring people for a specific department and kind of how we're going to grow that out in a really kind of long-term way as well. Do you think that over time, with your experience in the industry and what you've seen working with leaders, that the misconception or stereotypes around HR folks have changed, meaning that I know some people have said once they see an HR person in their meeting, they're like, someone's getting fired, or it's a bad news bears?
Having been in this field and this function for as long as I have, it's really all the same misconceptions. And frankly, those misconceptions are all rooted in some kernel of truth and fact. And so a lot of that's rooted in how HR professionals approach the work and do the work. And so there are many people that do this work that might be company centric at the expense of the workers. There are maybe even more HR professionals that are employee advocates without really understanding what the organization needs. And then we have the compliance cops and the administrative experts. And yeah, I think I think those misconceptions have been relatively consistent. And I think the facts have been relatively consistent, where it's been a long time that HR pros have been looking for a seat at the table, or looking to strengthen their influence. And hey, I'd say that right now we're in the golden age of human resources. There's been more opportunity for HR leaders during the pandemic and the great reshuffling or great resignation, and remote work. There's been more opportunity now than ever before for us to demonstrate that we can navigate these multiple stakeholders and we can really add value to our organizations.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we're hearing as well, especially over the last few years as HR and people teams being the fixers of everything and anything, or people like to ask them about as well. And there's been a lot of challenges, but a lot of great opportunities to redesign, have a larger seat at the table too. Are there any specific innovations in the people space? I know you mentioned one right now, especially in corporate, that wasn't as big, but remote first, or the ability to work from home. What is exciting to you right now?
Yeah, I've been really interested in and engaged in HR tech. So there are more and more tools, products, and services that support the workforce and support management teams and HR professionals in doing our work. So Oyster with global employment, also deal and remote, AllVoices and Culture Amp with employee engagement, 15.5 and Lattice with performance management. So the list goes on, and I'm involved with a number of different organizations that provide early feedback to those teams and their founders around the product and its offering and positioning. Really pleased to be able to do that with People Tech Partners and Sempervirens VCs. But yeah, that rise of technology supporting work has been really exciting to see. And again, AllVoices is part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That HR tech making jobs kind of a little bit more efficient, really looking at data at scale, insight-driven decisions, and giving people an opportunity, as you said, kind of a multitude of ways to give feedback early and often. It's never too early to start building that muscle and set the stage for your organization. I would also say something similar to kind of managers that you work with as well. You might not be talking to the chief people officer or the CHRO every day, but you're working with your managers, you're seeing other senior leaders across the business. In terms of patterns, again, how have you seen the role of these leaders change over time, and how should we be changing the way we measure effectiveness?
Yeah, so let me play back that question. How has the role of senior business leaders and of managers of people changed over time? And I think I'd say it has not changed dramatically. Ultimately, I think the role is for senior and mid-level managers is to help their organizations be successful. And so that role is consistent. Maybe it's become more pronounced that part of that role is to care for your people, is to be thoughtful about what they're going through with the pandemic and remote work. And so in this age where workers are more empowered by information and by choice, and the competition for talent is higher than ever before, leaders being supportive of their teams is that much more important. And how do you measure that? Yeah, I think it's through engagement scores, it's through attrition rates, it's through productivity measures. And again, it's through some of these more informal sensing sessions.
Yeah, I think that makes sense as well, in terms of really managers and leaders really empowering folks to do their best work and ensure the success of the business too, and really think about how they can meet people where they are too. I know we've talked about kind of the role of feedback, kind of how to give that in different ways and opportunities, whether it's one-on-ones or individual to company, peer-to-peer. I want to talk about kind of how that manifests across the business when you build this active muscle of this culture of listening. How do you see this culture manifesting across the organization and impacting the business when you have feedback present?
Yeah, well, hey, I'd start with ensure that good two-way information flow is happening, right? So internal comms, where leadership is sharing vision, clarity, priorities, essential. That is almost never focused on enough. And then think about the other direction, bubbling up. How is the workforce responding to what's going on? What questions do they have? What needs do they have? And so having that ear to the ground and having some regularly recurring, reliable feedback gathering opportunities. It's no longer just a suggestion box or email. Skip levels, all hands, ask me anything, one-on-ones. Like it doesn't need to be complicated. Just plot out how you expect to be communicating in both directions with your workforce.
Yeah, bi-directional feedback, really demonstrating that you're actively listening. Nobody enjoys the feeling of spending time giving feedback in whatever form and then never hearing about it again and it being in a black box. And the odds of me giving that feedback again are very low, slim to none. With feedback, there's opportunities to take action and make changes. We talked about innovation, which is really great. We're seeing more systems be redesigned, even with the best intentions, with new kind of systems and testing things out. People are bound to make mistakes, and that's okay. We pivot from them. What are some common mistakes you see kind of high growth organizations continue to make?
Yeah, high growth by its definition is high change as well. So high growth I define as 50% or more headcount growth in a 12-month period. And whether it's exactly that or something in that neighborhood, things are moving quickly. Mm-hmm. There's too much to get done, and there's never enough time, attention, or resource to get it all done. And so with that in mind, with that whirlwind of chaos, with too much to do, what more organizations should do more of is prioritize. Have tighter focus and greater clarity. Organizations often really struggle because they're trying to go in 6 directions at once. And so that's a really common mistake, especially in high growth organizations.
Absolutely. I always think about the phrase, if everything is a priority, then actually nothing is a priority, and you're split into a lot of different directions, and you're more likely to burn out as well. And there's kind of misalignment on goals. Andrew, I'm sure you have many of these throughout your career, but is there a recent proudest moment in doing this work that is either big or small that you'd like to share with the audience?
Oh, wow. Well, you mentioned I'm the founder of People Leader Accelerator. That's an executive education program for HR leaders. And we recently wrapped up a cohort, a small group of people go through this pretty intense program. And just the feedback that we get about how HR professionals that are at the top of their function in these high growth, high change environments are building confidence and building competence and confidence in the work and their role has been just immensely gratifying, and makes me feel useful to help more HR professionals again feel and be more successful. That's been a big win.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to say, and we're not in this alone either, even though it could feel like the weight of the world, and it's all kind of, even if you are one HR executive, there are other folks kind of experiencing the same things, and really talking about it, learning from one another is really important. Is there anything that I didn't ask in our conversation that you want to share with folks who are listening, or underscoring a couple key takeaways you hope people really bring with them after listening to our conversation?
Yeah, and thanks for the opportunity, and again for having me on. Rather than put something new on the table, I think I'll underscore something that you just said, Christina, and that is we don't have to go it alone. You'll go farther if you go with others. And so that includes listening to podcasts like this, that includes finding communities of practice and peers that you can learn from, you can share ideas, you can share resources, and you can turn to for support. Often the loneliest job at an organization, it's not the CEO founder. They actually still call the shots in a lot of ways. It's the HR leader. It's the HR leader who's trying to navigate a really ambiguous role. And so I would just reinforce what you said, Christina, and that is we don't have to go it alone. We can go further together.
Absolutely. I love that call to action. Andrew, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thank you.
Of course, as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers really being seen, heard, and understood, and know that's a requirement for the business to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.